Welcome to the Marsal Family School of Education's Innovator Showcase series. This series connects you to people, ideas, and innovations that are transforming education in the United States and around the world. My name is Don Purok. I'm a professor of educational policy, leadership, and innovation in the Marsal School. Today's conversation features four wonderful colleagues in the Marsal School: Deborah Ball, Francesca Forzani, Nicole Garcia, and Kiana Taylor. We'll be discussing their work together in TeachingWorks, an organization within the Marsal School that shines a bright light on the profession, preparation, and practice of teachers. Please join me in welcoming the TeachingWorks team to the Innovator Showcase. So it's my honor today to welcome the TeachingWorks team to the Marsal Family School of Education Innovator Showcase series. So welcome Deborah Ball, Francesca Forzani, Nicole Garcia, Kiana Taylor. So today we're going to spend our time together talking about this enterprise that all of you work in called TeachingWorks. But before we really get into it, I thought it would be great to learn a little bit about each of you. So I was wondering if in a few sentences, you could introduce yourself as you would introduce yourself to the teachers, the teacher educators, and the others with whom you work in TeachingWorks. Deborah?
Yeah, so when I am asked this question by other people, I often talk about the fact that I began my career as an elementary teacher, variously prepared in some ways and not in others. And the school where I taught was very different from anything I had attended as a young person. And there was just a lot to learn. And although I'd had teacher preparation, no matter what one has had, it's not enough. And as I worked on my own teaching, I became really curious about how does one learn to teach and improve one's teaching? I had various kinds of help, my school principal, my colleagues, but there was a lot to learn. And as I worked on my own teaching, I became involved with my colleagues. We were all trying to do different things. And so I became more and more interested in this question of how do we develop teaching? And then I began working in teacher education, and I had those same questions. How do we use that time we have with people to improve what they get before they even begin? And from that, of course, back to my own experience as a practicing teacher. So my interest in how really important teaching has been there from the beginning, and TeachingWorks has given me a space to be thinking about that more systematically and with more kinds of people in more areas than I did before. What about you?
So as the Deputy Director of TeachingWorks, I lead all of our work on pre-service teacher preparation, and I have since Deborah and I founded the organization in 2012. And I've been interested in the problem of how we prepare teachers at scale in the United States since I began my career as a classroom teacher. But the question of how do we get really excellent teachers into classrooms in the numbers at which we need them is a very difficult problem, and one that has motivated me from the beginning.
Nicole?
Kind of a similar story. Here, I was a high school math teacher, and I feel like I had a really great teacher preparation experience and felt prepared to be in my classroom, did wonderful work with kids. I miss my kids a lot. But when I was there, they came from many different schools. So I had this opportunity to see that they had really varied experience in mathematics before they came to me. And I began to wonder, what would it mean to support other teachers to do the kind of work that we were doing with kids, really engaging them in mathematical problem solving and really getting them prepared to think deeply about mathematics. And so I began to work in professional development and coaching and trying to support teachers in that kind of experience. But then I thought, couldn't we do a better job getting them prepared from the jump, right? And so transitioned to TeachingWorks at the University of Michigan, where we can work across all of those contexts, supporting teacher preparation, supporting practicing teachers, supporting coaches and administrators, and really just thinking about how we support teachers across their teaching lifespan.
Thank you. Kiana?
So my path to TeachingWorks looks a little different than my colleagues' path, or journey rather. As an undergraduate student who was entering into a teacher education program, I, after starting to take courses, didn't feel like I was going to be prepared actually. And the way that the rest of the program would evolve did not outline any ways that, like, how I would be prepared and what instruction should look like, and it involved lots of content, but nothing about like practice and instruction with children. And so for that reason, I actually chose administration and program support. So when I saw the description for the job that I initially had with TeachingWorks, it was a chance to be working with people who were concerned with and cared about the instruction that children receive, and to make sure that teachers were prepared before they stepped into the classroom instead of practicing and learning while on the job.
So it's interesting to hear from each of you what brought you together in TeachingWorks. But I think what would be really helpful for me is to really have a better idea of what TeachingWorks itself is. So I'm wondering, how do you introduce TeachingWorks to people, much as you just introduced yourselves?
Yeah, it's a great question, Don, because as several of my colleagues have already said, we work across different parts of the whole enterprise. We work with school leaders, we work with coaches, we work with beginning teachers, people who are not yet teachers, we work with practicing teachers. But the animating umbrella for all of this is that we're committed to improving the quality of teaching, and that's because at the heart of it, we believe that kids have a right to have really good teaching every year. And at the time we were beginning to incubate the idea of TeachingWorks, it was a period where, not that different from this current moment, there really weren't enough teachers to fill classrooms. And so we had more and more spaces in this country where, just out of sheer need, districts would hire people who had had either minimal preparation or none. We still see that problem. And we kept trying to put our eye on the children. So what does that mean for a child? To Kiana's point earlier, that you practice on children. Of course, we're always all practicing as we learn to teach. But is there something that could be done so children have the right to have somebody who actually can see them, can hear them, can understand them, can explain material to them, can help them connect? And that's just seemed like such a critical problem. And so we formed an organization that's essentially built on work that we did here inside the Marsal Family School of Education to start, but by now has expanded very broadly to include things we've learned from so many other people and programs. But we work externally, networking with other programs, with individuals who do teacher education, who lead programs, who design programs. We work with school district leaders and people who work in K-12 settings to improve the quality of teaching. So we're working in an unusual way across things that are generally separated in our system. We have kind of a non-system in this country that separates what it, for a teacher is a trajectory and for children is a trajectory. So our goal is to work together with others to improve the quality of teaching by supporting the opportunities that teachers have to learn to serve children.
I think one of the things that I appreciate about TeachingWorks is that although we have developed and worked very hard to really cultivate what our mission and our vision is, the one thing that has stayed part of the focus is always the children, and really being reflective about practice and about how we work with others to work on their practice. And so we will iterate, we will change how we think about our interactions with others and the work that we do with others because of what we learn, as Debbie mentioned, from working with all of these different entities and people.
What I think is so interesting in what the two of you said is that it's actually a really important move to consciously center children when thinking about education and its improvement. And then if you center children, then the people with whom they work most closely, teachers. Why do you think that is? Why is it so difficult, thus so intentional for your team, for your organization, to explicitly call out that you're centering children and teachers?
It's a really interesting question, I think, because as Francesca said, there are so many people teaching in this country. It's an enormous scale problem. There are about 4 million people in the country who teach. So for anyone who might share our interest in improving what students learn, which is a little bit different than centering children and their experiences, they are likely to find levers or strategies or approaches that to some extent work around teachers. And there's been a long history of that, is somehow getting to kids without going through the people whom you just said work most closely. An example would be building curriculum materials, which of course are needed, building policies that help to support how districts work or how programs work. But if you really think about that, those all avoid working with the actual people who build the relationships with children and help them to grow. It also makes invisible the work those people do. So we have not had a strong history in this country of really trying to understand the work of teaching. We're good at making standards for it or evaluating it or deciding who can be a teacher or recruiting people, but the actual work of listening to a child, knowing what they're saying, thinking about what to say next, how to adjust the curriculum, how to talk with families, all of that gets left really up to the individual to kind of figure out on their own. And then we get the problem we have, which is many, many young people not being served well, simply out of the what happens when people with goodwill try to do this difficult work without enough support.
To Deborah's point, I would say that what we really center is instruction, and that is what Deborah just said, although she didn't use that word. And I think what's hard about it is that when you watch like movies, for example, about teaching, you tend to, or schools, children, you tend to see these dramatic, kind of heartwarming or disturbing moments. You might see like a child hugging their teacher, or you'll see scenes of children living in poverty, something like that, that's designed to like tug at your heartstrings. We care greatly about those things. So I think to that extent, Kiana's right that we center children. It's the children who are always in front of us, out in front of us, and that is where we're looking. But where we're actually working is somewhere that I think feels really mundane to a lot of people, which is like, it's Tuesday morning at 10:23 a.m. and the teacher's in the classroom with 23 or 24 or 30 kids in front of them. And they're trying to work on a fractions problem or a text about the life cycle or something like that. And there are these interactions happening, and they're happening with a big batch of kids. And some of the kids are distracted, and there's an announcement made on the intercom, and the teacher is trying to unpack that academic content. And it's really hard work. And it's just not what a lot of Americans, I think of as really fun or really, really engaging to work on. They're more engaged by like what the school building looks like or the faces of the children. And again, those things matter. But for us, what really matters is unpacking content for a wide range of kids and doing it in ways that are ambitious and equitable, and really true to the content, because school continues to be the main place in the United States where children can go to learn academic content. And our job is to make sure that all kids get access to that content. And again, it's really hard. It's really hard to do.
So, in what you were just saying, it's not just that we want to center not just children, but children's learning. And in centering it, it's not that you just want to do the usual, just with more teachers. It sounds like you have real ambitions for what it is that teachers and students, paraprofessionals and others in classrooms should be doing together. That's something that I was really curious about. What's the difference that this reform-minded organization called TeachingWorks is really trying to make in the day-to-day work of children and teachers in classrooms?
So I think at the center of that, in reference again to Kiana's talking about children being at the center, we want classrooms to be a space where children's ideas about content are what the learning is built around. Of course, we have standards. Of course, we have curriculum materials. There are things that are guiding what it is that children are learning. But really, the work of teaching is about centering children's ideas, learning ways to elicit those ideas, to work with them, to help children learn from each other. So they're both learning content, they're learning about themselves as people who can engage in content, but they're also learning how to build a community, how to work with others, how to agree and disagree, how to make sense of people's ideas. Like that's the heart, that's the core of what teaching and learning is about, right? And it's very different, I think, from the attitude that I know a lot of people have about teaching, which is knowledge transmission, right? Which is that all you've got to do to teach anyways is to open up your book to page 128 and start there. Like that's what we're doing. And so we know that teachers know better than that. And we know that the people who are trying to help teachers learn to teach also know better, but we're trying to create a space where we can help people actually learn how to do those more complicated pieces of the work that move beyond just the kind of organization, curriculum, those pieces, and really learn how to listen to and respond to children and their ideas.
I think some of what we're saying shows how much, to your earlier question, what makes this difficult and what makes this special, is that the approach often has been a very fragmented one. So people center content by writing standards. We've written standards every decade for at least the last 50 years. That's important. We've developed curriculum materials over and over. That's important. We've thought about particular aspects of a school or a classroom, but now what people are talking about often is learning environments. And learning environments are important as well, but they're still not this dynamic relational work that both Francesca and Nicole and Kiana have already mentioned. All these things actually do matter. It's not replacing those with something else. It's that what Francesca's calling instruction is the interaction of all of those things in the minute-to-minute and larger spaces of children's work. It's creating the space where children can show up with what they know how to do and be helped to grow and learn. And that's what the cost is when we pull all of those things separately and don't find ways to coordinate the work.
As you're talking about the work, children have had a very interesting role in what you've been talking about. They're not only active and engaged in the ways that so many people sort of advocate, but it came across to me that they're respected. And that's a difference. I mean, respect often, as a colleague of mine, Whitney Hegg says, is something that children are expected to give to others. And in what you were just saying, respect is something that you're according students. That seems to me to be quite different.
I think in our vision of instruction, children's ideas, as Nicole said, are treated as the central resource. So Deborah has mentioned other resources like standards or the learning environment. All of those things are part of a big spherical world in which students and teachers are interacting. But our job as teachers is to think about what are students thinking and experiencing? What are the questions they bring to the material? What are the misunderstandings they have? What are the things that they're engaged by? And then we have the curriculum over here, and it's building a bridge between those two things. And it's really hard work. And I'll say again, we think it's really fascinating work, but it's not dramatic work. I mean, it is dramatic in a sense, but it's not the same as like watching a building go up in like a, fast forward kind of film. It's just very different kind of work. And it's hard to teach people to do it at scale. And it's hard to build public understanding of why it matters so much.
Can I say too, that I think that this idea of respecting children and respecting their ideas is central. And I don't think that there's anyone who doesn't want to respect children and their ideas. I think that it's really difficult work. You have to understand the content really deeply. You have to understand how children think and talk and share their ideas in order to respect them, right? Like you have to really be able to make sense of what it is they're sharing and be able to pull out those pieces and see where they're making this connection with this idea in order to convey respect to that child's idea. And that's incredibly difficult work, and that's what we're trying to work on together.
So a really good example of that is Nicole mentioned that she taught high school mathematics. Math is a place where that happens all the time. So someone can say they care about children's ideas, they're interested in what young people think, they're interested in the content, they're trying to build that bridge. But math is a space where repeatedly what people hear children saying is error. Mistakes. Math is permeated with trying to evaluate mistakes, when at least 3/4 of the time, when children say something unexpected, it's not actually an error. They're often answering a slightly different question to which you have to listen more carefully. They might actually making a tiny little step wrong where the entire idea is actually right. They may have an idea you haven't thought of before, which also draws on the content that you actually have to understand. And sometimes they've made a mistake. But most of the time, we hear children's ideas as off, as misconceptions, as wrong. And math is a space where we've continuously harmed children, particularly children of historically marginalized groups, as behind, as struggling, because we're unable to actually enact that work of respect by hearing their ideas and using them the way Francesca and Nicole have been saying.
In that way, I'm imagining you were just talking about students that have been marginalized, excluded. Some of those students come from community environments that make life difficult. As you're talking about the work that you want to do with children in classrooms, the classroom begins to present to me as something of a sanctuary, a place that a child can go and know they're going to be respected, know that they can speak. know that they can share, know that somebody will try to understand them. But that's different for a lot of children. That's not life as they experience it in other places. I'm wondering what the work is not only with teachers, but with children to develop their adolescents, young adults, to develop their capacity to trust in this space, to co-engage in instruction in the ways that you've been talking about.
It actually shows up initially in just the fact that we don't follow children across classrooms to know how they experience from one year to the next different adults working with them. There can be big changes in what adults are expecting of them or what they'll make possible. But I think the question you're raising is really interesting, and I'd like to hear what others think as well, is that it can also be very alienating to have school seem so cut off from your home environment and from your community, because quite often in the community, children have a lot of resources and know many things, but some of the effort to create a sanctuary, which is, I think, important in certain ways, can also be a way of shutting out resources and expertise that children have and their families have. So I think it's another example of the complexity of the work. Teachers do have to buffer aspects of the broader environment, and they have to find ways to include it. And those judgments can go way off or be really productive, but I'm sure others have ideas about this.
One of the things we're best known for at TeachingWorks is identifying a set of teaching practices, which we call our high leverage practices. These are things that teachers have to do in classrooms every day, and they're essential to support student learning. And if you look at our list of high leverage practices, and you can find them if you go to our website, www.teachingworks.org, you'll see that these practices encompass not just the work of unpacking mathematics or English language arts or another subject, but also the work of building relationships with children, communicating with families and caregivers, drawing on students' backgrounds and bringing that into instruction, the kinds of things that Deborah is talking about. And we think it's very important to make those practices explicit to new teachers and to give them support to engage in them, because you're right that a classroom can be a sanctuary, but it is very tricky to create one that is a sanctuary and that interacts the way that it needs to with the rest of the world. So we try to make very, very clear what the work is of doing that and to think about ways of helping novices learn to do.
I'm also just thinking a little bit from the secondary perspective of kids are actually really skilled at moving across their different communities and knowing what's expected and what the differences are and how they communicate and what's accepted. In a regular high school, kids are going to 7, maybe 8 different classrooms with different environments, with different expectations, with different definitions of how they're supposed to engage and what respect can mean. And, to Francesca's point, part of what we're trying to do with these practices is help people to understand that consistent practice across classrooms is also important. Kids should have opportunities to engage in discussion no matter what content area they're in, and that they should be able to learn the ways of talking and discussing in that content area, and to know that that's different, right? Like to really think about changing the way that you're talking across content area, across communities, across the places that they're engaging. But, to your point about the classroom being a different space, I think that is a place that kids are really able to navigate pretty well, and in ways where teachers often aren't very explicit about what the expectations really are. We just assume, each of us as individual teachers, that of course kids know what they're supposed to do when they come into our classrooms, right? And then we also know what happens when they don't do what we think they ought to be doing. And so we're really trying to help practicing teachers, new teachers, teacher educators understand that we need to be explicit about those things, and we need to have reasoning for why we're interacting in particular ways, and we need to be able to communicate those to kids in our classrooms.
So Kiana, I wanted to ask you a question about this question of how we connect with outside of school. And one of your roles at TeachingWorks has been to be one of the main connector with families who enroll their children in our summer math program. And I wondered, over the many years that you've been doing that, what kinds of things you've heard or learned about why families might enroll their children in a summer program. Does that inform anything about how we can connect better between school and home and community? What kinds of things have you seen or learned that we, as you said earlier, we learn from our interactions?
So with our elementary mathematics laboratory summer program, we're recruiting children through either individual school districts or through other programs or organizations. And there are a couple of things that happen when we send out materials. So there is how the teacher frames what this program is, and there is how we envision this program. And I think that parents are very thirsty for their children to have access. They're wanting their children to get access to something that they feel like they're missing, or to keep them busy over the summer, to keep them ahead of the game, because we're often working with students who are in communities where they are marginalized. That is the truth. And what they want is for their children to have advantages. And so they're seeking out any programming that will help them. And so sometimes they've read the flyer and they see University of Michigan and they're like, yes, let's do it, right? And so they don't really have a real expectation for like us engaging with them as families or with their children, but they just know that we offer programming that is likely to be something that will benefit their child. But once I get into the workings of recruiting and talking with families about the opportunity, one of the things that happens with me is that I don't just accept your application. I reach out to all the families to make sure they understand what the program is, because I know that often teachers don't frame this in the way that we would like them to frame it. And some of the ways that they frame the conversation or frame the program is that this is to get their child caught up. It's remedial in nature. And we do not think of this program as remedial at all. In fact, we know that the work that children do in this program is highly advanced, right? It's not things that they're used to seeing. It's not things that the teachers who are coming to observe and to learn have seen. So I like to help people see that this isn't just another program where their child is being seen as needing to be caught up on something. And after the program, I have parents who say, are you going to do this again? Are you going to come back to our school? Because we'd like our child to participate again. In fact, they have siblings who weren't able to participate for a number of reasons, not the age or grade we were working with, or had something else going on. We want them to participate too. And we have children whose families are excited because every day they come home from that program, they have a little task. They have something to share with their family, and they can teach them something. And that makes the student feel proud. That makes the parent feel proud. And the fact that it's content that they haven't themselves seen as parents, like they're like, I had no clue how to help them through this, and just get to see their child kind of work through teaching them. It's a really lovely thing, and I love hearing from the families. And a lot of times when we have programs within the Washtenaw County area, I run into families at the store or have other connections because I am from Ann Arbor, born and raised. So, I get these little colloquial stories about how their children are doing 10 years later. And that is actually really lovely to see these children as adults. That I hadn't expected. So it's been really good.
So in talking about the experiences that you are having with children in the context of programs, that made me wondering what's the full scope of the programming and work that's done in teaching. That sounds like a critical pillar of the work. I'm wondering where does that fit in relation to the full scope of work that plays out in TeachingWorks?
Well, maybe you would talk a little bit about our teacher preparation work and show that, and we can kind of show the different areas of our work and how they're connected.
Sure. Across all of our work, we're working on improving instruction. Sometimes we're delivering instruction ourselves in the case of the Elementary Mathematics Laboratory, which is the program that Kiana was just talking about. And we have people working with us to design that program and to watch it and to think about what happened in it each day. In our teacher preparation work, of course, we're working on what are the questions we're asking are what do new teachers need to learn to do and how can we support them to learn to do that? And we have programming for all kinds of teacher educators across the country. It's not just one role. There are different roles and there's different kinds of programs. We offer events every year for teacher educators. We offer custom programming and partnerships where we will work with a program or a group of faculty members who are looking to get better at something or have a set of questions for us. And we always have special projects going on, which are typically grant funded. It may be a collaboration with other teacher educators or other people working in improvement. So there's those three big areas of work. And then, of course, we work with K-12 teachers also on instruction, and maybe Nicole can speak to that.
So I think a few kind of directions or things to be thinking about. And one is, across this conversation, we've been talking about children and their thinking being at the center of our work. And the Elementary Mathematics Laboratory is an example of that, where we're focused on children and their learning, but we're also supporting teachers, administrators, coaches, leaders in their learning around that teaching. It's a really unique experience in that when you've been in schools, you get to see kind of one-off lessons with kids. You get to see 10 minutes here or there. We do lots of walkthroughs where we're seeing 10 minutes of everybody's instruction and making assumptions about that. But the elementary math lab serves as this opportunity to sit and watch 2 hours of math teaching every day for 5 days in a row and really watch that trajectory together, closely examine the teaching, provide professional development for teachers, leaders, coaches, et cetera, to really dive into what does it actually mean to work on teaching together? What is instructional practice? What do we mean by that? And to move beyond kind of the checklist version of what it means to teach, right? So we're supporting, with children at the center, we're supporting everybody's learning, but that's true across our programming, right? So we work with districts, and inside of the district work that we're doing, we're always focusing on children, their learning, and bringing real artifacts of instruction to the work that we're doing. So our teachers that work with us, they're video recording their instruction, and we're hosting video clubs around that in tandem with the professional learning. With our coaches are coaching, recording their coaching, bringing those artifacts, working on their own instruction together and the instructional improvement of the people that they're supporting. And the same is true for our administrators, where we're helping administrators coach, give feedback, and give each other feedback on the ways in which they're working to support teachers in their own buildings. But all of it with the children and their learning at the center.
So it's very much, as you were just describing it, sort of working on the improvement of instruction in the context in which it's situated, both organizational contexts, as Kiana was explaining, the family and community contexts. Is that part of your strategy for addressing an issue that had come up earlier in the conversation, which is improving teaching at scale? Not a single classroom, maybe not even in a school, in a system, more than that. So is this business of working on teaching in context sort of linked to your ambitions for scale?
Yeah, and it's very difficult because there's so many layers of what you might mean by scale. Francesca, I'm sure you'll say more about how you think about scale, but even once you get outside the classroom, there's the scale of a particular building, and that's often not fully coordinated, even under very highly constrained conditions. Then there's a school district. And you could say the same thing for teacher preparation programs. You've got individual courses. You could even have multiple sections of the same course that may not even be doing the same thing. You've got a program. You might have multiple programs. Many of the places we've worked have multiple teacher preparation programs. So working at scale would mean moving beyond what we've been talking about, which is the intricate interactions that happen inside of either teacher preparation instruction or K-12, but beginning to think, what does that look like, even in a relatively more local context, to be working in a more coordinated way that ensures that the work of improving the quality of what people are learning, whether teachers or children, is more systemic. But then, of course, you've got states, you've got the government, you've got policy. There are many layers of what it would mean to take this incredibly fragmented non-system we have in this country and create something that's much more coordinated and connected, both to achieve more systematic kinds of outcomes, but also to create opportunities to learn across contexts from people who bring different kinds of expertise. But I think everybody here thinks about this question of scale, so somebody else should pick it up.
I mean, Deborah just spoke quite a bit about not really just scale, but about fragmentation. So you can have scale and not have fragmentation. What we have in the United States is a sprawling enterprise because we are a large country and there are so many teachers and so many students, but we also have incredible fragmentation in the sense that there is no system. A great question that I think we need to be asking ourselves in this country is, what do we mean by a system? What do we mean to have an education system? what do we mean by that question at a district level, at a state level, or as a country? What does it mean to have a system? But we don't have much of a system. And we're in our work constantly finding that elements of this decentralized behemoth that we refer to as a system are butting up against each other. So maybe we're working in a school district trying to help teachers get better at their math instruction, and we find that they're hearing different messages from the PD providers that work with the curriculum that they're using. And so these two things are bumping up against each other. And then the teachers themselves have their own ideas about what good instruction is. And then the children are coming to school with a set of issues that are part of the story. And it's just a lot of fragmentation and a lack of coordination that makes the work very difficult.
And I think that's part of the reason that we work the way that we do. We work with teachers across their career because we know very well that we could do really amazing work in teacher preparation. But when those teachers get into their mentor teacher placement, what matters is what that mentor teacher does, right? They can either support or undo a lot of what was learned in the teacher preparation, even if they really built strong skill in the coursework that they do. And then we know when they move beyond that mentor teacher's classroom into the school that they're teaching, that environment takes over and they absorb the kind of modal teaching practice that's happening in that environment. So it's important for us to be working across those settings, to be working in teacher preparation while we're working with mentor teachers, while we're working with school districts and teachers in school districts and the leaders who set the initiatives and the focus and what is meant by strong instruction in their districts. And I think our dream would be to have a really concerted network in a location where we were working collaboratively with all of those entities to really build a cohesive, coherent system.
So as we're talking about the kind of fragmented, incoherent system that really complicates doing serious work on instruction, a lot of the elements of this system are part of the local system. A lot of elements of those systems lead all the way up to the State Department of Education, sort of the public bureaucracy that people typically imagine when they think about the education system. But institutions of teacher education seem to me to be very big parts of that system that may be off the radar of some people when they think about really what needs to be improved to improve to improve instruction and learning in classrooms. So that had me wondering, does TeachingWorks work with other teacher education programs to improve them in the way or animate them with the same values and ambitions that you've been discussing as central to TeachingWorks itself?
Yes, we do work with teacher educators and teacher education programs and institutions. We've worked with more than 50 teacher education programs across at least 20 states now, and that number grows every year. We work directly with teacher educators, with the people who are interacting on a daily basis with novice teachers, and we sometimes also work with deans and department chairs and program heads. But what we most love to do is roll up our sleeves alongside instructors, methods course instructors, field instructors, people who teach content knowledge for teaching courses. And we like to ask, what are you doing in your courses? What are the learning experiences that you're giving your teacher candidates? And how can we work with you to make sure that those are actually even more focused on the practice that those teachers are going to be engaged in once they are out in the classroom. And as I said earlier, we're best known for our high leverage practices, which tend to be very central to the work that we do with teacher educators. So we might have a teacher educator say to us, for example, I know I should be teaching my teacher candidates to lead discussions. I know discussions are really central to the curriculum that I'm working with. They're part of the standards in my state, and I do work on them, but I get this sense that my candidates just are flummoxed when they're out in a classroom. Like I've been out a couple times and I see them and they try to lead a discussion and it only lasts a couple minutes, or they'll ask a question and kids will start responding and they don't know what to say. They're kind of deer in the headlights. So I know I need to do a better job at this. And we have So first of all, I'll say we will be the first to tell you that a practice like leading a discussion is really challenging. So it's not like we have a magic bullet, but we do have a set of strategies that we think really help new teachers do a better job launching discussions, facilitating discussions, and then bringing them to a positive close. And we have, parallel with that, we have methods that teacher educators can use in a teacher education program to help new teachers learn to use those practices. We do a lot of work, for example, with a pedagogy that we call rehearsal, which is when teacher candidates are practicing a practice, such as discussion with each other, and they're getting coaching and feedback, primarily from their teacher educator, but also from their peers. Every year we work with teacher educators who come to us and we practice doing that work. We practice running rehearsals. We'll actually practice on teacher candidates here at the University of Michigan. It's a lot of fun and everybody learns a huge amount about what the work is in helping kids actually talk with each other in a classroom, and how you can help a new teacher learn to do that.
One of my favorite projects that we've had here working with teacher educators was actually in our own state of Michigan. We were working collaboratively across universities for 5 years. 5 years to help kind of define and practice and think about what would it look like to redesign all of our teacher preparation programs to be focused on practice. And so that group came together across 5 years, multiple times per year, and we practiced together. So we designed teacher preparation activities together, led them with each other, went to each other's classrooms, and really worked on what would it look like to focus on practice in our own methods courses. And one of the kind of culminating things that happened out of that program network was that our state adopted a set of core practices that is aligned with the TeachingWorks high leverage practices as part of the teacher preparation standards for the state, because that network really lobbied for it. That was what they wanted, was to make practice the center of teacher preparation.
We had a similar project also about 5 years with the California State University, where we worked with a network of, we began with mathematics methods course instructors, and then we expanded to some other methods course instructors. And we did what Nicole's talking about, where we went to each other's classrooms, we gave each other feedback, we looked at our course plans, we looked at individual lesson plans for teacher education courses, and we really collaborated to take what in many cases was already excellent teacher preparation and make it even better. And not everybody knows this, but the California State University system actually produces about 10% of the teachers in the United States. So they're really a powerhouse when it comes to just making sure there are excellent teachers out there in classrooms. And they're at the lead in thinking about what does excellent teacher preparation look like. So we were really happy to be a part of that. And also it was also really fun and really challenging. And we all learned a lot, I think, from being in a classroom, because it's never easy, whether it's a K-12 classroom or it's a methods classroom at, Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo. It's hard. It's hard for us, it's hard for them, and it's such fascinating work. So we're always really grateful when we get to be out in somebody else's classroom, because we learn a lot about this practice that has motivated all of us from day one.
This last discourse is interesting to me, given the context that Kiana set earlier, and talking about the work that you do with children and families to really understand what it is that TeachingWorks has to offer. So that's really intimate work, like at this sort of level of the family. And in this case, you have TeachingWorks climbing many rungs of the ladder, almost to the level of being a policy actor. You're beginning to work in state policy spaces. Now, when you began doing this work, did you imagine that it would sort of have that kind of arc, one that runs from the sort of most intimate interactions of kids and their families around their day's learning, all the way to the learning of policymakers as they decide what needs to be done in order to make a difference of the sort that you are trying to make?
I think it's likely that we had a sense that those were involved, because even at the time we founded TeachingWorks, there was a lot of policy ferment in this country around the preparation of teachers, recruitment of teachers. But I think what we've been able to see is how closely and intricately those connections show up. It's not just like several layers, but they're actually connected across layers. So when, for example, the state of Michigan uses the high leverage practices as one of the core elements for teacher preparation in the state, that's an example of moving from the very close work right into what many teacher educators in the state now know about, which creates the opportunity to, again, work closely. So it breaks down the kind of separation of levels, but yes, they're very connected. I wanted to mention that there's another theme that we've left a little bit sort of running through our comments, which has to do with equity. So this was actually, in many ways for us, founded on the notion that to the extent that the United States has never really supplied sufficient training or opportunity for teachers, what we saw when we first began to incubate this organization was that where students were least likely to get consistently well-prepared teachers were children in historically marginalized communities, low-income communities. And from the beginning, one of our challenges has been, how do we work our way into an enterprise that has been really dominated in many ways by white faculty, white teachers, that I'm sure everybody knows that the teaching force in this country is 80% white people, while the composition of the K-12 population is getting close to 60% students of color. So there's a big disconnect there, and that isn't just about who does the work, which is important, but it's also like what is taught, what is valued, what's considered to be good teaching, what's important to learn. So the connection with families and communities is important for informing that. The way we fold equity into the content, into what we've talked about many times here as instruction, is a very important part of our work, because for us, that's not, again, a fragmented piece over here, oh, let's learn about the problems with racism in the society or other forms of oppression. It's inside of the classroom work. And that's been a distinctive part of our work and a challenge to make that visible, particularly in the environments we're living in now. But it's always hard because it's not the norm. And so many of us have talked today about the things that have to be changed. And one of the things that has to be changed is actually making teacher preparation and teaching about the children of this country. And that actually has a great deal to do with diversity and with equity. And our work has been about that from the beginning, motivated by that. And we're constantly having to learn, what does that look like? How do we check ourselves? How do we continue to improve that work? Because without that, we're really not serving the needs that we see as crucial to the improvement of instruction.
It's interesting, though, because not only is TeachingWorks working in the many ways that have been discussed so far, in the contemporary context, to work on equity is also to position an organization as a political actor. Is this a change? Do you feel that there were political dimensions to the work of TeachingWorks throughout its history, and this is just a new version of the type of political work that an organization like TeachingWorks needs to do? Or is it that work of this sort that you're doing is suddenly much more political than it once was?
I mean, I'd like to see what everybody would say, but teaching is political work and always has been, in the sense of policy and in the sense that values and norms and who has power have always been a huge part of that. We find ourselves at this moment with new kinds of debates about that, but I wouldn't say that it's new. I think that it requires of us to think what our strategy is, because we're not giving that up. It's central to the needs of the work that we do. So I wouldn't say that it's new. I think it has new dimensions at the moment. What would any of you say?
People love to say that children and teaching and learning isn't political, but it is. I think Amy Gutman, in her book, what's it called, Democratic Education, breaks down really well why it's impossible to separate what happens inside of classrooms from.
And debates about equity have been running through this whole enterprise forever. So this isn't really a moment. This is just a particular way of working in this time, but is reminiscent of many times that came before it. It's
interesting, and this is a big, complicated enterprise bundled under a very catchy label, TeachingWorks. And I study enterprises like this for a living, and know that in most cases it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. In some cases, 1 step forward, 2 steps back. I'm wondering if you can reflect on the work that TeachingWorks has done to date. What would you think of as the sort of big steps forward, the big wins, the big successes? And what would you think of as the steps back, the challenges, the things that sort of either pushed you into a little bit of a retreat, or upon reflection had you retreating a little bit to rethink?
I think one of our biggest successes has been helping to change the discourse around teaching and teacher education in this country. In the 5 years or so before we founded TeachingWorks, around 2005 to 2010-ish, you did not hear people talking about the importance of new teachers being able to engage in core practices or high leverage practices. And it is now commonplace to hear school district leaders, funders, the people who fund this work, and teacher educators across the country use those terms and talk about the importance of people being able to engage in that intricate work. And they're not just talking about it in general, they're talking about the specific things that teachers do in the classroom, which may sound like a small win, but I think it's a really big win. And we are certainly not the only organization that helped push that change, but we were right there at the forefront of it. And I feel really good about those changes.
I think another big win is thinking about the reinvestment we've seen in supporting teachers' practice. So for many, many years, the kind of support for teachers was, one-off professional development sessions, textbook implementation focused professional learning. And many of the districts that we work with have really reinvested and thought about how they're going to support teachers' improvement of practice continuously across years instead of shifting initiatives. Initiative shift is a huge thing that happens in most districts. You get 1 to 2 years and then we call it good, right? Everybody's a master. And the districts that we're working with, some of them we've been working with for 7 or more years on particular content at particular grade levels and improving a small set of practices that are really difficult for teachers to implement. And to see that kind of commitment and understanding that that's what it takes for instructional improvement, I think has been an amazing step forward.
I think what I hear my colleagues also naming in beautiful ways, in larger scale ways, is that you have to be hopeful as a teacher, as an educator, or someone who is interested in improving the practice of teaching. And it is not for the faint of heart. And I think that my colleagues do an excellent job of helping people realize the gravity of what it is that teachers do every single day and helping them understand what their place is in the system of things. And so while it doesn't seem like a huge win, sometimes to see just a group of teachers or a teacher or a small set of teacher educators work on something, I think to start that process is a big win. I mean, you can at least start to move the needle in the way that you want things to go. So you're continuing that hope that you have for the profession. And even with our children, it doesn't mean that the children that we work with will see immediate change, but at least we can set them up in a place where they can begin to build their academic identity apart from what their teachers have started to build for them. And so that some of their classmates can also see them differently than their teachers or their schools have set them up to be within their environment.
I think another important thing that's been both challenging and important is, in the same way we've been saying people don't really understand the work of teaching, we've said that in lots of different ways. Teachers are also not respected in this country for the most part. People are thought of to be not particularly the most academically successful. People often think that whoever becomes a teacher kind of did that. And to some extent, we contribute to that discourse as a profession sometimes. But I think we've had numerous experiences where we've been able to show, for example, a student absolutely brilliant saying something that nobody else who was observing could hear. They couldn't detect the mathematical quality of it or the interpretation of a piece of text. The observers couldn't see it. And when they could see what it took for the teacher to understand that content and to understand that child, it begins to show and honor the complexity of the work the way we honor other kinds of professional work. We've also had experiences of putting everyday adults in the position of trying to figure out a piece of student work in mathematics, and they absolutely can't do it. And those things I think of as sort of a kind of polite shaming of people in the direction of having them realize that the intellectual and personal and social demands of teaching mean that the people who do this work are not only committed and deserve our respect, but are doing work that's actually very difficult, and they themselves, therefore, demand that kind of respect. And I think we've done some things that have helped to make that more visible, and I think our teaching colleagues and teacher preparation colleagues appreciate that effort because that's a steep hill in this society.
I've been shamed in that way by on occasion as a math teacher. What have been the challenges? What are the, if there's a headwind into which you're traveling, what is it?
One of the things is what I mentioned earlier about the tendency to pull all parts of this work apart. And so when we say that we're about content and we're about equity and we're about practice, two kinds of things arise. One is that people who are particularly concerned with one of those, let's say the content, say, oh, but you're distracting from that by paying attention to something like eliciting a student's thinking. You need to work on the content. Or they say, you're not being deliberate enough about the equity work because it's integrated into the instruction. We don't see it. So the effort to show what that interaction looked like is actually very difficult. And yet that is what teaching is. In any moment of teaching, all those things are at play. So we resist the pulling apart, but that has made things different and made us often the object of critique, which is fine and helps us to grow, helps us to communicate, but it's because there's such a strong norm to pull out learning or equity or content or a teaching practice when in fact our work is about putting those things together. I think we've also struggled, our success around the high leverage practices has been remarkable. However, finding the balance between specifying teaching and understanding how contingent it is something many people besides us have written about and have studied, and teachers know it. Teaching involves a great deal of discretion and contingency and context. So how to find that sweet spot that is, it can actually be named, and yet like so many other professions, that doesn't mean that you can ever fully specify the work. And I think that's not just a communication problem, that's an intellectual problem of what does it mean to specify professional practice sufficiently that there's room to honor that it can't be fully specified, but how does one prepare for wise execution of that in context with real people and real context? That's really hard. And I don't think that's the pressure from other people. I think that's us recognizing that that's a constant adjustment to understand that better and to find the way to describe that and work on it.
Couple of summers ago, I was working with a science educator from a university in Minnesota. She was here in Ann Arbor at one of our workshops, and she wanted to redesign her science methods course to focus more on, she had about 3 high leverage practices that she wanted to integrate closely with science content, which is a very smart way to think about it. And she pulled out a document that showed the standards in Minnesota that she was responsible for covering in her methods course. And this document had to have 35 items on it, and it had things on it like teach teacher candidates about goggle safety in a lab, which is important. Nobody wants to get chemicals in their eyes, right? But we have seen so many challenges where people they are so responsible for doing so many things inside of their courses, and the space allocated to teacher preparation is often very short. Mm-hmm. So to Deborah's ongoing point about fragmentation, there's so much happening inside of a teacher preparation program. There's so many different directions that people feel pulled that I would say that has been one of our biggest challenges in trying to move the needle on teacher preparation practice. We just don't have a clear and realistic collective understanding in this country of what it is most important for new teachers to be able to go out and do. And it's not just doing, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Underlying that practice is all these different kinds of knowledge and the ability to improvise, as Deborah is suggesting when she calls it a contingent practice. And without that kind of consensus, we are all over the place. And that problem is exacerbated by state standards and curriculum standards and all this other stuff. It's a mess.
You know what I thought you were going to say?
No, I can imagine.
But I think you're going to say, oh yeah, is related to how much people who are in charge understand about the complexity of teaching. And the reason that I'm raising that is because I think it hits both in teacher preparation and in the support of practicing teachers, and that people still think that teaching is simple, and we don't devote enough time to supporting teachers to improve their practice or to learn how to teach in the first place, which is like, it was in the background of what you were saying. But I think about, the pandemic hit education hard, and I feel like coming out of that, there was a rollback on the amount of set aside time and support for teachers to do the work that they need to do, which has increased exponentially over time, all of their responsibilities, and building schedules and support in such a way that teachers actually have collaborative collegial time and time to do professional learning. And that's also true for teacher preparation, both in the context that Francesca was just talking about, where inside a course, you have 45 hours to teach somebody how to teach. And we've got preparation programs that are not university preparation programs where we have an even more compressed, limited time to help somebody learn how to be a teacher. And those are increasingly getting approved and waived in states to allow people into the profession to do that work. So I think that's one of our places where we're feeling that pushback is, on one hand, we're hearing people want to do this work, to have this commitment, to take it seriously, to begin to talk about what it takes to be an educator, and at the same time, pulling back any kinds of support to do that work well.
What Nicole just named is time, and also funding. There isn't an unlimited supply of funding, right? And, lots of programs are kind of applying all for the same pot of money. And it makes it challenging when you can only do work for a short period of time. One thing that my colleagues at this table will not say is that we have expert facilitators, and teachers who do a beautiful job at really understanding what teacher educators that we work with need and tailor our work to what those needs are. And it works very well. But when you have only 3 or 4 sessions across an academic year, it's really hard to build on that. And we've been lucky to be able to work with some of these organizations for an extended period of time. And we've seen lots of growth, but we would love to do more of that. We'd love to be able to really dig in much deeper and get deeper into what it is they want to build long term instead of just across a few sessions. I think that's one challenge that we face.
To wrap up, there's one question that's been kind of bouncing around in my mind as we've been talking. And we've heard stories of learning, lots of learning from children, teachers, school leaders, system leaders, policymakers. But I had a question of learning come to mind when, Kiana, earlier you were talking about children leaving the summer work that they do with TeachingWorks and going home and interacting with their parents in a kind of new role, a new identity as a student. And that had me wondering, in everything that TeachingWorks does, if you have any perspective on what it is that parents and families are learning from the work of TeachingWorks.
I think what families and parents learn from their children is that they're capable. They are often shaped by their experiences in school, and depending on who their teacher is, that looks differently for each child. And for the child who may be struggling with content or the environment, I think families start to understand that there are lots of different ways that the environment, the teaching, the other classmates all interact to shape who people begin to see them as. And so just that 1 week of having a different opportunity really allows them to see what their student, what their child, their loved one is capable of.
So if I'm a listener or viewer and I want to connect with TeachingWorks, what do I do? Where do I go? What are the grab handles for me?
www.teachingworks.org is our main website. You can also connect with us on Facebook or Instagram. We also have a separate website, which is the TeachingWorks Resource Library. So if you Google TeachingWorks Resource Library, you'll get taken to our repository of resources primarily for teacher educators, also for teachers.
You'll also find a set of our asynchronous materials and experiences available through EdHub, so you can hop on the EdHub website and find those there.
And we have programs running throughout the year that people can enroll for, that you can find on our website, that are many different. The Elementary Math Lab, we have institutes, we have programs that both virtual and in person that people can sign up for. And there'll be new ones coming in the coming months that we're very excited about.
Wonderful. Kiana, Nicole, Francesca, Deborah, thanks for joining me in the Innovator Showcase.
Thank you so much for having us.
Great to be here.
Thanks for tuning into the Marsal Family School of Education's Innovator Showcase series. And special thanks to Deborah, Francesca, Nicole, and Kiana for introducing us to TeachingWorks. For more resources related to today's conversation, be sure to check out the links in our show notes. And don't forget to follow the Marsal Family School of Education on LinkedIn, on Instagram, on Facebook, and on YouTube to stay connected with our community and to hear more about upcoming conversations. Thank you for joining us.